Today I'll be discussing the collapse and destruction of the Kievan Rus. The Kievan Rus was the forerunner civilization that existed prior to Muscovy as well as modern-day Russia. The Kievan Rus is the foundation for all Slavic nations in Eastern Europe. The Kievan Rus is the end-all be-all, I suppose you can say, or no, it's not the end-all be-all. It is the mother, rather, the mother civilization that all originate from. The military of the Kievan Rus was primarily that of infantry. It was untrained peasants that were just taken up from their cities' militias. So they weren't really they weren't trained. One, they were usually poorly equipped. They wore no armor, which is why. Okay, so the contrast here is that this is your classic stereotypical medieval knight, knight in shining armor. That was not the case for the rank and file, but of course you had your nobility that were more of the elite forces that were primarily of the boyars and other rich nobility and merchants. Excuse me. But they never truly excelled at horsemen or cavalry. That it's not excelled to the point of that their ultimate doom would have been. They would never, obviously, or anyone during that time would have matched the Mongolians, and they would certainly pay the price for that. Paradise Lost. So, in the aftermath of Yaroslav the Wise's death, it slowly became clear that there wouldn't be another as able to secure and manage and maintain the entirety of the Kievan Rus and make sure that it would all be able to concentrate itself under a central authority again. And so, while many would try, it would continuously fail, and we would slowly have a decentralization effect whereby all these different states here would slowly arise as independent principalities and notorieties, and they'd pay perhaps a lip service to the central authority out in Kiev, but they would never, or rather, they wouldn't properly, it wasn't a proper centralized state anymore. It was more of a ripoff of the Holy Roman Empire, for being literal, in that it was primarily a bunch of individual princedoms all vying for their own interests and all having their own rivalries between each other. And the idea of a unified empire existed between all of them, but the actual unity that would require that just no longer existed at this point. The title of Grand Prince of Kiev was still used and was used by Mstislav, but it was just a title of prestige. It had no actual power. It was purely symbolic. Old enemies bring a new death. The Cumans and the Kipchaks both constantly harassed the frontier of the Kievan Rus, and were a constant 100 years old enemy that they could never get rid of or surpass. But and as a result, they would consistently be a problem for them. But the Kipchaks were destroyed by the Mongols, and the Cumans were a part of their force. So it was the Cumans and the Kipchaks that allied with each other to defend their homeland against the Mongols. And the Mongols had successfully convinced the Cumans to to betray that's the best word to use, to betray the Kipchaks, thinking that the Cumans' territory and country would be spared, but the Mongols themselves decided that after killing the Kipchaks, that they would immediately kill the Cumans as well, and thus the Cumans fled their territory and went into the Kievan Rus, and there they found Mstislav and pleaded their case, where they basically said that the Mongols were coming, and there would be no mercy, and they would all die unless they banded together. The Mongols knew that the Cumans had fled, and that they'd fled towards the Kievan Rus. They sent an envoy to collect the Cumans, basically, that Mstislav would have to, or at least by the Mongols anyway, would have to, or the demands rather, were that the Mongols wanted the Cumans back because the Cumans had wronged the Mongols by openly declaring war and being at war with them, on top of betraying your ally and all that stuff, because the Mongols valued politeness and those kind of cultural customs heavily, as we're about to see here in a second, when the envoys are slaughtered by Mstislav, because Mstislav doesn't truly understand the oncoming horde that's about to destroy him and his entire civilization. But as we all know, when you slaughter the envoys of a Khan, that typically heralds your doom. And this would unfortunately be the case for the Kievan Rus. So a last alliance of Kievan Russians, it's Kievan Rus, the Kievan Rus, and Cuman horsemen. So the Cumans made up the cavalry, the infant, rather the horse units, the cavalry. Whereas the Kievans primarily made up the militia forces, the infantry. So Mstislav, with his charisma and prestige of being the Grand Prince, was able to build a coalition of individual princes. So we'll go back to the page here that I had the map on. So Mstislav was able to build a coalition of several princedoms, especially that of, if I recall correctly, Chernigov and Peroslavl and Ryazan. I'm afraid my Russian isn't that good. But they were able to build a coalition of princes, including that of the Cumans, to fight back against Subutai, or not Subutai specifically, because at that point it wasn't Subutai, it was his superior. I'm struggling to remember the name of, but and I'll just use Subutai, and that's the one, that's the name everyone goes to anyway. To fight back against the Mongol horde, really. But the problem is that, we go back to this, is that even though at this point the Mstislav and the rest of the princes rather would have known that they were fighting for not just their homes, but just for the very sake of their entire civilization, empire, their homes, or their cities. They were fighting for their dwellings. They were fighting for everything. But even that common thread could not bind them together to create a central command. And as a result, you have what is basically several different armies all marching in the same direction under allegedly the same banner. But they're all marching for their own cities. They're fighting for Chernigov, they're fighting for Kiev, they're fighting for Ryazan, they're fighting for Smolensk, they're fighting for etc, etc, and the Cumans are fighting for themselves, obviously. And so you have all these disparate authorities, and that reflects itself in the command structure, where there are there are three, if I recall correctly, there are three major generals, and you're talking about three major generals in a setting like this where communication is almost impossible in the middle of a battlefield like this, and it reflects itself in the outcome of the battle. The Battle of the Kalka River was, in the very beginning of it, a success. They had driven the Mongols out, and that's what they wanted to do. The whole point of the expedition was to drive the Mongols out of their territory. But instead of just taking the win, so to speak, they continued to go after and pursue them. And they pursued them for 9 days. Now, some historians believe that this was an actual route, not just a feint. As the Mongols are famous for their feints in this respect, that they will have an engagement with, the Mongols will face an enemy. They will faux break down and not surrender, but run away, leading their enemies to follow them, only for them to double back and then crush them with overwhelming force from all sides and completely annihilate them. Or, well, not completely annihilate them. The Mongols were clever in that they while they would surround you, they would leave a single corridor open for you to run away from, or run away through, rather. And this was because the Mongols believed, rightly, I think, that men that believe there's no hope, like that they're completely surrounded, that this is their last stand, will fight harder than men that know there's a single way out. And so they will let people run away, only to then go hunt them down and kill them mercilessly anyway. So, the Kalka River, that fateful time when Mstislav the Bold, the Prince of Chernigov, and Mstislav Romanovich, the Grand Prince of Kiev, rode out and were brutally destroyed. The Cumans. So what happens is that as they're approaching the Kalka River, the Mongols get over, and as the Cumans are crossing, the Mongols double back with their force of the army, because the Mongol force almost immediately broke, because the not Subutai, but Subutai's superior fell in battle, and Subutai. So this is the first time Subutai was properly leading an actual army. As a result, Subutai, again, this is why people think that this might have been an actual route, fell back, and so the questionability of whether or not this was an actual route or not, and this was some sort of really well executed feint, or false retreat, whatever you want to call it. Of course, that remains to God, or to the ether, rather. But again, I keep using these words, but whatever. The Mongols doubled back across the river, crushed the Cumans. The Cumans fled in terror and crashed immediately into the infantry columns of the princes. The princes, again, were then several different armies, so there's no direct communication or even command structure that they could really fall back on. Just every individual prince is just seeing, bunch of their allies just rushing back at them and getting smacked in the face with, what is basically, terrified horsemen. So they, break in terror as well. And the only ones that are able to truly stick around for a little while are, I believe, Mstislav the Bold's contingent. And they get themselves up on a hill, and the Mongols, or rather Subutai, was able to convince them to surrender, and then they're immediately all butchered. So, their entire force is destroyed. They've captured all the princes and the other high-ranking authorities and nobility, and unlike other and later armies who would just ransom them or even just directly kill them outright, the Mongols famously, as displayed in this portrait here, feast upon them These are all the grand, all the princes, all the men of high authority in the Kievan Rus that rode out with Mstislav are being crushed to death on a wooden plank while all the Mongol high command feasts upon them. A truly horrible way to die, not to mention humiliating. But worse still is that the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223 was the true last stand for the Kievan Rus. There would never really be a united front again, even though this, calling this a united front is being extremely generous. But the worst is yet to come, because Subutai, after destroying them on the Kalka River, flees back to Mongolia because he doesn't really this wasn't a force for an invasion. This force was more just like a reconnaissance mission. This was never supposed to be a direct invasion. This was just the forerunner. And now the Mongols not only know that they have won a spectacular victory where they destroyed and brutally killed a lot of the leading men and nobility of their rival state, but they also have key intelligence now, where they know that they're not really a unified people anymore. They're fractured states, but also key to all that is that they also have the cities have walls, and the Mongols now know from their invasions of China how to destroy said walls, and they will not be safe behind those walls any longer, much to the chagrin of the people and citizens of those cities, unfortunately. The storm returns. Ogedai Khan sends his hordes to destroy the slowly dying Kievan Rus. So Ogedai Khan, after the previous Khan, I believe Chinggis, I'm pretty sure it's I'm pretty sure that was Genghis. Yes, Genghis Khan passes away, and Ogedai Khan, his brother, I want to say, takes his place as Grand Khan, and Ogedai sends Subutai back to the Kievan Rus to destroy it and to annex it as a part of the empire. Subutai returns with a massive force. I would almost go as far as to say that it was almost unnecessarily huge. Just because he would have known that they were all disparate nations at that point. They were they were unified by common culture and religion, and people, but their political ties had been so fratricidal that they didn't really care anymore about that. Although perhaps he thought that they but the defeat at the Kalka River would have unified them enough to maybe pose some sort of strong risk to the Mongols. So instead he sent or rather was able to gather and garner a huge force to go and absolutely destroy whatever remained. So I mean, this picture I have here isn't it's not accurate. Obviously, it's just it's a nice little picture. These are supposed, if I recall, I think these are supposed to be a Kievan horsemen, because these are definitely not Mongolians. But especially with their insignias and stuff down here. But I mean, I think this one right here is supposed to be a Polishman, and I think this is supposed to be a Galician. But I'm not really certain. I'm not really certain about the rest of these though. Unfortunately, here actually let's go back to this. So here we could see that it took them something like 12 years, or longer than that, excuse me, about 14 years, for them to return. So by the time that the Mongols actually returned, any sort of fear of the Mongols that the Kievans might have had long since dissipated, and they're right back to feuding amongst themselves again. So much to the point where that one prince would watch his rival's city burn to the ground, and laugh and cheer as it happened, and then be shocked, surprised even, to see that the Mongols had not only that destroyed their city, but were now there to destroy his. So it goes to show just how just fractured and um, just uncaring, I guess, that they became of one another. It's no longer fair to call the Kievan Rus an empire or any kind of unified state. By the time the Mongols come in, by this point, they'd already drifted apart into disparate nations, almost, or just about. Give it another generation or two, and by that point, that would have been it, probably. Um, but not Olgadai, rather, but Subutai, at the head of this massive Mongolian force, just comes in and just starts laying waste, city after city. And of course, the prize of all, which the Mongols would have known the Mongols would have known the significance and importance of Kiev, is destroyed. Kiev is absolutely sacked and destroyed. There is little to nothing left of the city. It is completely destroyed, and with it goes the ideas and beauty of the Kievan Rus. The being of it only survives through its people, its culture, its religion, but not in its in its truthfulness. I suppose you say it's just a poor reflection later on, and it's never truly the scholarly and focused force it once was. It was completely unmade, with the destruction not just of Kiev but of Chernigov, of Ryazan, of countless cities just burned to the ground and completely razed, with pyramids of skulls outside of the citizens, with the Mongols ruthlessly destroying everything and everyone. And the only real area to survive the destruction, someone would have said the Moscow survived, but I mean Moscow was sacked. Moscow was also sacked, but by this point Moscow wasn't like it wasn't a Kiev. It wasn't a large city. It was some small backwater area, that gets to survive because it's irrelevant and not of importance yet. But the only place of importance that does survive without being completely leveled and destroyed is Novgorod. Novgorod exists and survives without any kind of Mongol, freaking finger of God crap that just completely levels and destroys all the people. Because Alexander Nevsky, the 16-year-old ruler, prince even, of Novgorod, immediately surrenders to Subutai, and Subutai, for this showing of respect or cowardice. I wouldn't say cowardice because Nevsky, to call Nevsky a coward is beyond inappropriate. Because while all this death and destruction is going on, while Subutai is just destroying at this point the corpse of the Kievan Rus, Nevsky is fighting the Teutonic Knights, and is famously in this picture, or this painting rather, destroys them at the battle on the ice, where against all the odds, Nevsky's infantry militia is able to destroy and kill Teutonic knights. So we're talking about what I mentioned or showed earlier as a stereotypical knight. Those are the guys. The Templars are the Templar knights, but they're the Teutonic knights, and at this point the Livonian knights as well, are there in force on their horses. They have their full plate mail. They are trained men of action that know how to kill you easily and will do so without mercy. Especially at this point, since the Teutonic Knights are a religious crusading order that are there specifically to get rid of paganism, one in Livonia and Estonia and modern-day Lithuania, but also to fight back against the heretics of the Eastern Orthodox Church, which at this point is like 200 years odd of post schism. So they were more than willing to kill one another for religious reasons. But Nevsky is able to secure survival not just of Novgorod, but of the legacy of the Kievan Rus by surviving and destroying this outside threat of the Teutonic Knights, but then subjugating himself to the Mongols. So he's able to unfortunately for him, he had two civilization-ending threats on his doorstep at the same time. He was able to get rid of one and completely smush it out of the way to make it a threat, but no longer a civilization-ending threat for his descendants. And then the Mongols. I don't think anyone could fairly blame this man for surrendering himself and his city and his subjects to the Mongols, especially after hearing tales of all the death and destruction and untold human suffering that the Mongols brought with them in their wake went to those that didn't show them blind obedience. And Nevsky would show them blind obedience. Nevsky would throughout his reign, repeatedly stamped down any kind of rebellion or any kind of distaste that his people might have for the Mongols, because if they did, he knew that the Mongols would show up and freaking lay waste, just destroy. And as a result, Nevsky Novgorod survives. Novgorod survives and thrives. The Republic of Novgorod will go on to exist well into the 14th and 15th centuries, only being destroyed by Muscovy and being subsumed and being created into the larger Russia by, I believe, Ivan the Terrible, or Ivan III, rather, Tsar Ivan III. And lastly, the subjugation of the entirety of the Kievan Rus to the Mongol yoke, the Golden Horde, would forever change the culture of the Slavic people, as well as completely reimagine and reshape the mythology. I mean, not mythology, but the cultural foundation myth, I suppose you say, where there are people that you have children's stories about the Mongol invasions. You have women and children vanishing in the night because they were bad people, whatever, and the Mongols took them as a sort of ghost story and whatnot. And the heroes of old and that fought the Mongols now perished and died trying, but they fought to the last, and they were honorable men, and they were brave men, and all this kind of stuff. But chief among all that was that the idea that the Mongols were a sort of they were God's wrath on the Kievan people for whatever reason, because God isn't very specific, unfortunately, with his wrath. God just wraths onto you, and it's up to you to figure out why. But so here I have the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, I don't think you could really say that the Mongols. I guess you say the Mongols did bring the disease with them because they did bring the bubonic plague and the Black Death. So I guess you could say that. Could you say starvation? Yeah, burning down everything. But at the same time, they did kill everyone. So I guess there's no one. You have to be alive in order to starve. And obviously, the Mongols brought war with them. So I guess you could say they did. They brought all four. And well, there are horsemen and they are Mongols. So I guess this does really fit. I put this more as a a romantic notion of the subjugation of yourself from the wrath of God, but it actually fits kind of well with just the fact that the Mongols will destroy you utterly and completely. So that, unfortunately for the Kievans, is the end of the Kievan Rus. They will survive in Novgorod, the only real principality that would survive, along with like Polotsk, if I pronounce that right. And and Moscow and other small principalities that survive that are obviously vassals. So they survive, sure, but they're not they're not independent and they're not their own kingdoms. No, they are complete subjects of the Golden Horde that are expected to pay tribute, and not get out of line. And these they would be pretty much subjects right up into the mid 15th century. So for over 200 years, pretty much, they would be subjects of the the Golden Horde, the Great Horde of Chinggis and Ogedei and Genghis. And that is all I have. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being patient. I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a nice day. And yeah, farewell.